Let's take a look at some of the key characteristics of controlled demolition. First, we have a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the structure. We have straight down symmetrical collapse into its own footprint, because demolition waves remove the column support, resulting in a free fall speed, virtually, through the path of what was the greatest resistance, thousands of tons of structural steel. We have a total dismemberment of the steel structure, so it's loaded and ready for shipment. We have minimal damage to adjacent structures, sounds and flashes of explosions heard and seen by witnesses, enormous clouds of pulverized concrete, squibs sometimes, explosive charges that go off at the wrong times, chemical evidence of cutter charges. These are all fairly typical, and they go to show us direct evidence of explosive destruction. Now, the interesting thing is that not one of these typical characteristics of controlled demolition can be explained or accounted for by fire, let alone all 10 of them. Typically, we'll have government documentation, expert corroboration, foreknowledge, and video documentation, all of which supports the hypothesis of controlled demolition, providing proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's take a look at World Trade Center 7 now. It was 47 stories tall, what would have been the tallest building in 33 of our states, half the height of the Twin Towers, dwarfed only by its proximity to what was, for a couple of years, the tallest buildings in the world. It was not hit by an airplane. It was the third World Trade Center high-rise to collapse on 9/11 at about 5:20 in the afternoon. World Trade Center 7 was hit by debris from the North Tower. You can see it being pelted here. And it sustained about 8 fires, according to NIST, on various floors. This is the World Trade Center 7, 47 stories high. Don't be confused by the shadow from this building. Here we have the 12th and 13th floor fires and the 7th floor fire on the north side of the building, the opposite side of the building that was being pelted by the North Tower. Curiously enough, the Securities and Exchange Commission was operating out of this floor, which lost thousands of files related to hundreds of cases it was actively pursuing against Wall Street companies like Enron and WorldCom. So we are looking for an investigation that goes well beyond the buildings, of course. Now let's take a look at the evidence of World Trade Center 7 and see how it stacks up against the typical features of a controlled demolition, starting with, is there a sudden onset of destruction? Let's listen to this emergency word.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. We were in shock, and then
a sound of a clap of thunder, a shock wave ripping through the building, and windows busting out, and then the building coming down. Do we have a straight-down symmetrical collapse into the building's footprint? Let's listen to Dan Rather narrate this collapse for us as we take our first look at the collapse of Building 7.
And what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Dan never repeated these words after this first day. In fact, we didn't see this building coming down after 9/11. Let's take a look from West Street. Maybe we haven't quite understood yet what's going on. Well, I'm not quite convinced yet. Let's take a look in this side-by-side comparison with a known controlled demolition on the right. Did the building fall into its own footprint? Pretty much so. A little bit of overlapping into the street. I could have done a much better job myself. A tidy rubble pile, nevertheless. Do we have demolition waves? And how do these remove the column support? Well, here's a floor plan of Building 7. Now, to bring a building smoothly, symmetrically into its own footprint without falling over, what we have to do is remove the core columns, because what we want to do is bring the outside of the building in on itself. Now, this involves a high degree of precision that fire is not capable of, being an organic process. We're told by NIST in a December 18th update meeting that we attended via telecon that there is virtually no influence in the collapse from the debris from the North Tower or the damage caused by it, or from the diesel that may have been spilling out of the diesel line. Why? Well, the east penthouse is the first part of the building to collapse a few seconds before the global collapse. And so NIST is now targeting column number 79. And so that is where they say the collapse initiated. Do we have a free fall speed of collapse through the path of greatest resistance? Let's listen to David Chandler.
We can measure the downward acceleration of Building 7 by video frame analysis. I used a magnifying glass to place markers on the corner of the building on each frame. From this we can get a data table and various graphs. The slope of this graph indicates acceleration, which is shown here to be about minus 10.279 plus or minus 0.6. Free fall in a vacuum is minus 9.8 in these units. That falls within the margin of error of this measurement. In other words, the rate of fall of Building 7 in the first few seconds is indistinguishable from free fall in a vacuum.
What are we talking about? You can see second by second the building gaining downward momentum. You can plot the drop distance on a graph of time, and it fits the free fall curve almost perfectly. What does this mean? That the columns had to have been removed, and removed virtually simultaneously on each floor, synchronistically timed, so the building had no resistance virtually on the way down. Do we have a total dismemberment of the steel structure? We had a 47-story skyscraper compressed to 4 stories. How does this happen? This building had some moment-resisting frames on several floors. That's where the beams are welded very rigidly to the columns. Do we have sounds of explosions, though? Here's Craig Bartmer from the New York Police Department.
And the whole time you hear boom, 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 boom. So, I think I know an explosion when I hear it. I was real close to Building 7 when it fell down. That didn't sound like just the building falling down to me while I was running away from it. There's a lot of eyewitness testimony down there hearing explosions. I didn't see any reason for that building to fall down the way it did. And a lot of guys should be saying the same thing.
How about Kevin McPadden, former Air Force Special Operations Search and Rescue?
He came back over with his hand over the radio, and what sounded like a countdown. And at the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1, and he was just saying, "Just run for your life, just run for your life." And then it was like another 2, 3 seconds, you heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when the compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.